You would think life out in the Texas Hill Country was supposed to be quiet, with mornings starting in the soft light of dawn, the hum of cicadas, the smell of mesquite wood smoke drifting from someone's porch. That was how it used to be for me. My name is Daniel Whitaker, and my ranch sat on 40 acres just outside Kerrville, not much by Texas standards, but enough for a man who wanted peace, routine, and the company of his horse Duke. Duke was a tall, chestnut gelding with a white blaze that looked like someone spilled cream down his nose. He was more than livestock. He was my partner, my brother, my tether to sanity in a world that always tried to pull men like me toward the city, toward desk jobs, toward forgetting who we really are. With Duke, I had something pure, but nothing pure lasts when bad neighbors show up. The trouble began the day the Garcias moved in next door. On paper, they were just another family from Houston looking for country living. In reality, they brought every bit of city arrogance into a place that runs on respect. Loud parties shook the cedar posts on my porch at 2 a.m, beer cans floated across the barbed wire fence, and their teenage son thought it was funny to rev his ATV back and forth along the property line like he was patrolling some war zone. I remember standing on my porch one night, watching their fireworks explode right over my pasture, Duke running in circles, terrified, his breath steaming in the cold night air. That was the first time I whispered to myself, bad neighbors. Nothing in this life will ruin you faster than bad neighbors. I tried to be patient. I baked them cornbread when they first moved in, and when their trash bins kept tipping over into my ditch, I just picked up the Bud Light cans and tossed them in my own barrel. When their dog got loose and chased my chickens, I brought it back to their yard without a word. But patience has limits, and Texas ranchers are not known for bending forever. One morning, I noticed the corner fence post split clean in half, barbed wire sagging like a drunk old man. I knew that post. I set it in concrete myself 10 years earlier. It did not split by weather. That was truck tires backing into it. That was willful disrespect. I swallowed my anger and fixed it. But then came the 4th of July, when fireworks thundered until 3 a.m, and Duke was so spooked he nearly broke through the corral. I walked over the next day to talk sense into them. Mr. Garcia stood there in mirrored sunglasses, beer belly pressing against his faded Astro shirt, and grinned at me. Relax, neighbor, it is America. Fireworks are freedom. That was his answer while my horse was shaking and bleeding from scraping his flank against a gate. I walked home that morning feeling the weight of helplessness and rage mix into something toxic. I had lived long enough to know when storms were brewing. The emotions hit like waves. First came anger, the kind that makes your jaw clench until your teeth hurt. Then came the helplessness, because men like Garcia always count on the system looking the other way. Sheriff's deputies drink at their barbecues. City council does not want to get involved in neighbor disputes. People shrug and say, that is just how it is. But then came the guilt, the kind that ate at me while I brushed Duke's mane at night. Was I failing to protect the one creature that trusted me? The horse that carried me through riverbeds and across sunburned pastures deserved better than a man who only grumbled under his breath. That guilt turned into steel. I started documenting everything. Every ATV track that crossed onto my land, I photographed. Every beer can, every shell kissing, I dropped into a plastic tub in my barn. I bought trail cameras, disguised them as fence posts, and waited. I subscribed to property data records to see who actually held the deed to the Garcias' land. When I found their mortgage was stretched thin, with late payments, I smiled for the first time in months. Bad neighbors always leave a paper trail. They always think they are untouchable, but they always owe somebody money. But the storm broke faster than I expected. One September evening, I walked into the pasture to find Duke limping, blood streaking his hind leg, cuts across his flank like someone slashed him with wire or spurs. He stood trembling, eyes wide, breath short. My chest burned as if someone had taken a hot poker and pressed it against my ribs. I loaded him into the trailer and hauled him to the vet, my fists gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The vet said he would heal, but warned the scars would last. I paid the bill, more than $2,000, and drove straight to the Garcias. I stood at their front porch, blood still drying on my shirt from wiping Duke's leg. When I confronted them, when I demanded to know if they had seen anything, Mr. Garcia smirked again. "Relax, neighbor," he said, voice dripping with mockery. "That was just a wild Mustang. They come through here sometimes, tear things up. Probably what you saw." His wife laughed behind him, as if my pain was a punchline. I felt the ground tilt under me, rage mixing with disbelief. Wild Mustang? We were miles from any herd. Everyone in the county knew it. They thought they could gaslight me in my own land, in my own boots. That night, I sat in my kitchen staring at Duke's halter hanging on the wall, the smell of iodine still clinging to my hands. Every memory I had of peace on that ranch felt poisoned, but with the rage came clarity. The fight was no longer about noisy parties or beer cans. It was about survival, about principle, about drawing a line that said, "You do not touch my horse and walk away laughing." My emotions hardened into resolve. I knew then the battle would not be won with yelling over fences. It would not be won with fists or guns. It would be fought on paper, in offices, with phone calls, with letters, with agencies and laws designed to crush people who thought they were clever. If the Garcias wanted a war, I would give them a uniquely American one, the kind fought with insurance claims, federal livestock protections, and property liens. I whispered it to myself that night before falling asleep. Bad neighbors think they are clever, but they do not know how fast the system can eat them alive. The morning after Garcia smirked and told me Duke's injury was the work of some wild Mustang, I woke up with the kind of hangover that does not come from whiskey, but from fury. You know the kind. Head pounding, hands shaking, every nerve ending buzzing like a live wire. I sat at my kitchen table with a black coffee, staring at a stack of trail cam photos spread like playing cards. There were tire tracks, boot prints, even a grainy shot of their teenage son climbing the fence line at 2 a.m. My first thought was to call the sheriff again, but I knew how that script played out. He would nod, write something down, and then remind me, neighbor disputes are tricky. That is when it hit me. I did not need the sheriff. I needed bureaucracy. Most men curse paperwork, but I knew America's real weapons are not bullets or fists. They are forms, filings, claims, and codes buried so deep you need a lawyer's flashlight to read them. I pulled out Duke's vet bills and began to highlight words: suspected human-inflicted lacerations, agitated behavior consistent with abuse. Those words were not just medical, they were leverage. And leverage, in a land of insurance companies and state livestock boards, was worth more than a 6-shooter on your hip. The first call I made was to the Texas Animal Health Commission. I explained that my horse had been injured under suspicious circumstances. The woman on the other end paused, then said, "Sir, we take livestock cruelty very seriously. I will send you the forms." The forms arrived by email in less than an hour. I filled them out with surgical precision, attaching every photo, every vet receipt, every note. When I hit send, I felt like I had just loaded a shotgun, only this one fired subpoenas instead of shells. Next came the insurance angle. I knew the Garcias carried homeowners insurance, because every mortgage does. I also knew their premiums would skyrocket if there was even a hint of liability for animal injury or property damage. So, I called their insurance provider, not to accuse, but to ask for guidance as a concerned neighbor. I explained the fireworks, the ATV tracks, the injured horse. The agent grew very quiet. Quiet is good. Quiet means they are typing notes that will haunt someone later. By noon, I was knee-deep in conspiracies of my own making. I pictured a web of agencies, inspectors, and auditors descending on the Garcias like vultures in starched shirts. I imagined federal men in boots measuring barbed wire posts, clipboards in hand, muttering words like code violation and civil penalty. It was half daydream, half plan, but it fueled me. Still, anger without evidence is just noise. So, I spent the next week expanding my surveillance. More cameras, hidden microphones disguised as rocks, even a drone I ordered off Amazon that could fly the property line at night. I felt like I was running my own CIA ranch division. Some folks might say that is paranoid, but paranoia in Texas is just another word for preparedness. And sure enough, the paranoia paid off. 3 nights later, the cameras caught Mr. Garcia himself standing by my fence line with a pair of bolt cutters. The photo was blurry, but his Astro shirt was unmistakable. My blood boiled, and my lips curled into a grin at the same time. That picture was gold. That picture meant trespassing, property damage, and intent. Intent is a prosecutor's favorite word. Of course, there were emotional storms too. Every time I looked at Duke's scars, guilt gnawed at me. He would lower his head into my chest, as if asking me why the world had turned cruel. And I had no answer. I spent evenings brushing him, promising out loud that justice was coming. My words sounded ridiculous in the empty barn, but I meant them. That horse trusted me more than any human ever had, and I was not going to let him down. The fight grew bigger than one horse. I started talking to neighbors up and down the county road. Turns out the Garcias had a long trail of offenses. Someone's mailbox smashed. Someone else's goats let loose. Another family swore their property line had been moved by a few feet after Garcia drove in new stakes. Patterns emerged. And patterns are the one thing bureaucrats love more than donuts. Armed with witness statements, photos, vet bills, and a folder labeled Bad Neighbors Evidence, I drafted a letter to the county attorney. I wrote it like a sermon, every sentence building toward the undeniable sin at the heart of it all. When I mailed it, I imagined it landing on some desk with a heavy thud, making a secretary raise her eyebrows and whisper, "This is going to be trouble." And yet, the Garcias carried on as if untouchable. They hosted louder parties, louder than ever, as if mocking me. One night I swear they aimed fireworks directly over my barn. That was the moment paranoia tipped into conspiracy theory. I started to believe they were part of something larger. Maybe they were testing me. Maybe this was some federal land grab scheme. Maybe they were even working for developers who wanted my ranch. It sounded crazy, but conspiracy is just another name for pattern seeking when you have been wronged. So I leaned into it. I began digging through county property tax records, bank liens, even social media posts. I discovered that Mr. Garcia had filed an insurance claim last year for storm damage that coincided with a clear weather week. Fraud. Fraud is not just a moral sin, it is a legal feast. I printed it all, added it to my growing folder, and smiled. By the end of the month, I had built something bigger than evidence. I had built a case, a fortress of paperwork, testimony, and photographs. Every piece another brick in the wall I would crush them with. I was no longer a rancher with a wounded horse. I was a general preparing for war, armed not with rifles but with regulations, fines, and the slow grinding gears of American justice. As I lay in bed one night, listening to the distant sound of their music thumping through the dark, I whispered to Duke's photo on my nightstand. Bad neighbors think they can break a man, but they have no idea how much paper I can throw. The war did not start with guns or fists or screaming across the fence line. It started with envelopes, plain white envelopes sliding into the Garcia's mailbox, one after another, each one carrying the cold weight of official paper. The first came from the Texas Animal Health Commission, then one from the county zoning board, then a thick packet from their homeowner's insurance carrier stamped in red, "Request for additional information." I pictured Mr. Garcia standing in his kitchen, tearing open letter after letter, his smirk fading with every line of bureaucratic English. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Meanwhile, I kept building. Every morning before sunrise, I walked the fence line with a flashlight, camera ready. Every afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table with coffee, filing documents like a man training for the Olympics. It was not just revenge anymore, it was obsession. I wanted every move they made recorded, cataloged, and ready to deliver to anyone wearing a badge or carrying a clipboard. My Bad Neighbors Evidence binder had grown so thick I had to buy a second one. Each binder carried a sticky note on the cover, Volume 1 and Volume 2. The emotions were strange. I thought I would feel lighter as the case grew stronger, but instead the weight got heavier. I dreamed of Duke limping through firecracker smoke, his eyes rolling back in fear, and woke up in a cold sweat. During the day, I laughed at my own conspiracy theories, then wrote them down anyway because in America, even a paranoid hunch can turn into a court exhibit if you word it right. I started seeing patterns everywhere. The Garcias' teenage son driving to school late, probably a juvenile citation waiting to happen. A sudden silence in their backyard, probably hiding something in a shed. I was turning into a one-man surveillance state, and though part of me knew it, another part whispered, "Good. Let them feel watched." Then came the breakthrough. My trail cam caught something better than bolt cutters. It caught Mr. Garcia himself climbing into my pasture at midnight, stumbling drunk with a beer bottle in hand. He stood by Duke's corral, laughing, waving the bottle, then smashing it against the fence. I printed the photo, enlarged it until his face filled the page, and taped it to my wall. That was no longer suspicion. That was trespassing, destruction, intent, and malice. All words the county attorney loved more than donuts and re-election speeches. The fight escalated quickly. An investigator from the Animal Health Commission showed up at my ranch. He wore starched jeans, boots polished like mirrors, mirrors, and a badge clipped to his belt. He inspected Duke's scars, flipped through the vet bills, and nodded slowly. "We will pursue this," he said, voice as dry as mesquite bark. 2 days later, I heard from another neighbor that the Garcias had gotten a surprise inspection at their place. Trucks with state plates, men with clipboards measuring fences, asking questions, jotting notes. The bad neighbors had finally felt the system breathing down their necks. But bureaucracy is slow, and rage is fast. I needed another angle. That is when I remembered the fraud. I spent 3 nights digging deeper into Garcia's insurance claim history. With a few calls, a few open records requests, and a little luck, I discovered a pattern of false claims, storm damage that never happened, a shed burglarized with items later seen on Craigslist, even a flooded living room that coincided with a drought. Fraud was not just my leverage, it was the fuse to light a much bigger fire. I compiled everything into a packet and mailed it anonymously to their insurance company's fraud division. Within a week, an investigator in a suit showed up at the Garcias' driveway. I watched from my porch through binoculars as Mr. Garcia argued, waving his arms, while the investigator calmly scribbled notes. I nearly spilled my coffee laughing. Bad neighbors may laugh at your horse's pain, but they cannot laugh at canceled insurance policies and frozen claims. Still, I wanted more. I wanted them to taste the slow grind of American justice in every corner of their lives. So, I filed a property tax complaint, claimed they had built structures too close to the line, claimed their dog run violated county code. I knew half of it might not stick, but that was the beauty. Each complaint triggered an inspection, and each inspection meant more eyes on them. It was not just me against them anymore. It was me and an army of clipboards. The Garcias' parties grew fewer, their music quieter. One evening, instead of fireworks, I heard them arguing, voices sharp, the sound of glass breaking inside their house. That was when I realized the war was working. My conspiracy theories had not been paranoia. They had been prophecy. Yet under all the victories, the emotions churned. Sometimes I looked at Duke's scars and wondered if revenge was worth the obsession. My friends at the feed store told me to let it go. "You won't get your peace back chasing bad neighbors through the courts," one old rancher warned me. But peace was not the goal anymore. Justice was, closure was, and maybe, if I was honest, humiliation was too. I leaned into the fantasy, whispering to Duke as I brushed his mane at night. We are not just fighting them. We are fighting every bad neighbor in America, every loud party, every loose dog, every fool who thinks they can wreck a man's land and laugh. It sounded crazy, but Duke nickered softly like he agreed. Horses do not lie. By the end of fall, the Garcias' world had begun to crack. Their insurance premiums tripled. County inspectors visited weekly. Their mortgage lender filed a notice of default after late payments stacked up. Neighbors who once tolerated them stopped waving. They had become pariahs, isolated in the same house they thought made them kings of the hill. I knew more was coming. I could smell it in the air, like ozone before a storm. I had set the gears in motion, and the gears of bureaucracy never stop. They grind slow, but they grind fine. And when they finish, nothing remains but dust. That night, I sat on my porch with Duke grazing nearby, cicadas buzzing, and whispered into the dark. Bad neighbors thought they could break me, but the system is bigger than all of us, and now it is eating them alive. The collapse of the Garcias did not happen with one dramatic explosion. It happened like a slow-motion implosion, one crack at a time, each one echoing across our quiet stretch of Texas until the whole rotten structure gave way. I did not need to lift a finger anymore. The system was working exactly as designed, and I just had to feed it paperwork the way a rancher feeds hay into a baler. It started with the lien. One morning I drove into town to pay my own property taxes and overheard a clerk muttering about a new filing against the Garcias' parcel. Curiosity got the better of me, so I asked. Turns out the bank had slapped a preliminary lien on their place due to missed mortgage payments. That was music sweeter than any country song on the radio. Bad neighbors love to act rich, but the truth is, usually one late bill away from the repo man. Then came the lawsuits. The county attorney, spurred on by my relentless documentation, filed charges for trespassing and animal endangerment. Civil suits stacked on top of that, one from me for damages to Duke, another from a neighbor over a destroyed mailbox, another from the county zoning board over illegal structures. If you have never seen the inside of a small-town courtroom on a Monday morning when bad neighbors get dragged in, let me paint it for you. Rows of folding chairs, a cranky judge tapping his gavel like a man swatting flies, and the Garcias looking like kids who got caught shoplifting at Walmart. But the real blow came from their insurance company. After the fraud division confirmed multiple false claims, their homeowner's policy was canceled outright. No insurance meant no safety net, no coverage if their next firework torched a shed, no shield when lawsuits rained down. Mortgage companies do not like uninsured properties. Banks like theirs like it even less. Within weeks, the notice of foreclosure was taped to their front door. I will never forget the day the tow trucks rolled in. Big, loud diesel beasts with repo men in reflective vests, hauling away the Garcias' jet skis, their ATVs, even that souped-up truck the teenage son used to race along my fence line. I stood on my porch with a mug of coffee, watching like a man at a parade. When one of the repo men asked me for directions to the nearest gas station, I smiled and said, "Turn left at the corner where bad neighbors used to laugh at my horse." He laughed, not knowing the half of it. Meanwhile, Duke was healing. The scars on his flank were still there, white lines against his chestnut coat, but his spirit was stronger. I rode him into town one Saturday, head high, ears forward, and people nodded, whispered, "That is the horse that started it all." My revenge had grown into a kind of legend, a story people swapped at the feed store, half fact, half tall tale. Some said I had the FBI involved. Others swore I hacked into Garcia's bank account. I let the rumors grow. Conspiracy made the victory taste even sweeter. Emotionally, I should have felt triumphant, but what I felt was complicated. Watching the Garcias unravel was like watching a slow car crash. Satisfying, yes, but also strangely empty. Their yard grew overrun with weeds, their once loud parties replaced by silence. I caught Mrs. Garcia sitting on the porch one evening, smoking alone, her face tired and hollow. For a moment, guilt pricked at me. But then I remembered Duke bleeding in my pasture, and the guilt turned back into steel. The final reckoning came in December, when the foreclosure sale notice appeared in the local paper. Property to be sold at public auction, it read, listing the Garcia's address. I clipped the ad and taped it inside my binder. On the morning of the auction, I rode Duke down to the courthouse square. A crowd gathered, bidders in cowboy hats, bankers in suits, curious locals whispering. When the auctioneer called for bids, the Garcias stood off to the side, pale and quiet, their world reduced to numbers shouted in the open air. I did not bid. I did not need to. Just watching was enough. The property sold for half what they paid, the proceeds swallowed by liens and lawsuits. By the time it was done, the Garcias walked away with nothing but their truck and the shame that follows you longer than debt. The results were as thorough as any Hollywood revenge fantasy, except mine was written in ink, not fire. The Garcias lost their property, their toys, their reputation, and their peace. I gained more than closure. I gained the knowledge that in America, revenge does not always mean fists or guns. Sometimes it means clipboards, fines, and the slow grinding gears of bureaucracy. That night, I sat on my porch with Duke grazing nearby, sipping a beer as the sun sank low. The silence from the neighbor's lot was thick, peaceful, almost sacred. For the first time in months, I felt calm. I leaned back in my chair and whispered, "Bad neighbors thought they could break me, but all they did was teach me how strong paper can be." The Garcias were gone by January. The day after the foreclosure auction, I watched them load the last of their belongings into a beat-up U-Haul with half-flat tires. No more ATVs screaming down my fence line, no more fireworks rattling my windows, no more dogs chasing my chickens. Just silence. The kind of silence a man prays for when his head hits the pillow. Their house sat empty, a hollow shell with weeds crawling up the siding, and a for sale sign leaning crooked at the edge of the road. I should have been celebrating, and for a while I did. I rode Duke down the county road without fear of bottle rockets flying overhead. I let him graze along the fence line without worrying about teenagers throwing rocks. Every ride felt like reclaiming ground I had lost. People in town stopped me at the diner to shake my hand. "Heard you finally got rid of those bad neighbors," they said, like I had slain a dragon. My story spread, at the feed store, at the post office, even whispered in the courthouse halls. Folks treated me like a man who had stood his ground and won. But here is the part nobody tells you about revenge. Once the dust settles, you are left staring at the rubble. I would sit on my porch at night, listening to the cicadas hum, watching Duke swish his tail under the moonlight, and feel something heavy. Revenge had been a full-time job. Every morning I woke with purpose, every night I fell asleep plotting. Now, with the Garcias gone, there was nothing left to fight. Just me, my horse, and a quiet so thick it sometimes felt like loneliness. I began reflecting on what it all meant. The Garcias had mocked me, laughed at Duke's pain, treated me like a fool, and they paid dearly for it. Justice had been served, not the wild kind of justice people imagine in movies, but the slow, grinding, suffocating justice of paperwork, fines, liens, and foreclosure. It was not a fistfight in the street. It was death by 1,000 forms. That was the most American kind of revenge you could ever get. Yet, I could not ignore the cost. Duke's scars would never fade. Every time I brushed his coat, my fingers traced the white lines where flesh had once been torn. They were a reminder of what bad neighbors can take from you: peace, safety, dignity, and how even victory cannot erase what was lost. Sometimes I caught myself wondering if it had all been worth it, if maybe, instead of unleashing the entire machinery of the state against them, I could have chosen a different path. Maybe forgiveness, maybe moving away myself. But then I would hear Duke's steady breathing, feel his warm breath against my arm, and know the answer: some lines you do not let people cross. The lesson I realized was not about revenge at all. It was about respect. Out here in Texas, you respect a man's fence, you respect his land, and you damn sure respect his horse. The Garcias never learned that, and the system taught them the hard way. But I also learned something about myself. I had more fight in me than I ever imagined, and that fight did not need fists or bullets. It needed patience, paperwork, and the willingness to endure when others thought I would give up. By spring, the weeds swallowed the old Garcia property. Birds nested in the gutters, and the for sale sign faded in the sun. I did not care who bought it next, because I knew I could survive whatever came. I had stared down bad neighbors and lived to tell the tale. I had found out that revenge in America could be waged with lawsuits, insurance policies, and zoning codes, and that sometimes that was more devastating than any confrontation across a fence line. One evening, I saddled Duke and rode to the ridge where my land sloped toward the horizon. The sky burned orange and purple, cicadas thrummed, and the wind smelled like cedar. I stopped there, looking out over the quiet fields, and whispered, "We made it, boy. Bad neighbors are gone. It is just us now." Duke flicked his ears and nudged my shoulder like he understood. Maybe he did. Horses carry truths deeper than words. The peace I felt then was not the peace of victory. It was the peace of survival. The Garcias had tried to break me, but all they did was reveal my strength. My revenge had been thorough, my justice undeniable, but the real lesson was simpler. You can lose your calm, you can lose your patience, but you do not lose your dignity. Not if you stand, not if you fight. And so, I let the bitterness go. The files, the photos, the binders labeled bad neighbors evidence. I boxed them up, shoved them into the back of my barn, and let them collect dust. Duke deserved a man who brushed him in silence, not a man obsessed with paperwork. I deserved mornings of coffee and sunrise, not nights of plotting. The Garcias were just a chapter, a loud, ugly, painful chapter, but a chapter nonetheless. My story went on. Duke's story went on. And the land, as it always does, healed itself under the Texas sun.